This is just the beginning.
Good afternoon. I'm Nyla Boodoo, host of Axios Today, and thank you for joining us. This is a special broadcast. This is Axios Events 2020, a program that's a recap of our newsiest conversations with the people making and breaking the news in 2020. Joining us from Southborough, Massachusetts is our business editor, Dan Primack.
Thanks, Nyla. Today, we are looking forward to capping off a successful year of virtual events on topics ranging from politics and the 2020 election to COVID-19's impact on the way we work, and of course, the future of healthcare. As COVID-19 started taking over everything, our events team shifted to this virtual model. We did our first virtual event on March 19th, and since then have done over 80 of them on a range of topics of both national and international importance.
And in those events, we've produced more than 300 separate interviews while covering the major consequential moments of the year. And that's what today's about, covering why it matters when it mattered most. In our first recap segment, we'll shine a spotlight on the movers and shakers in the world of politics, where we saw a year full of social and political upheaval. Here's commentary on issues from police reform to the contested lockdown of major metropolitan areas during COVID-19.
And one thing I was really hoping to talk to you was the specifics and the particulars there. You've been an advisor at the highest level. You've been inside the room where decisions are made and strategies are formed. What is something that people should be pushing their elected officials on, saying, you don't get my vote if you don't do this, or we're going to be out here demonstrating and causing a ruckus if you don't do this? Is there a one particular change or a regulation or a law that folks can look to and say, I need to get behind this and I'm going to throw all my weight behind it? Or just a series of things that are going to make a big difference?
Yeah, so this isn't a one size fits all, and this isn't like there's a magic solution. But I'll give you one thing, for example, that's already underway. A couple of weeks ago, President Obama called on our nation's mayors to review their use of force policies with their community and determine whether they have it right. There are examples in the 21st Century Policing Task Force report that was rendered under President Obama of specific steps that we can take to improve that bond of trust between police and communities of color. And one of them is de-escalation. We have to train our officers to de-escalate. We have to look for implicit biases. We have to look at the equipment that we're using. We discontinued selling to local law enforcement, military grade equipment. And we encourage officers, get out of your car, get into the community, get to know them. And I think what we have a right to expect is a Justice Department that is robustly protecting our civil rights. When President Obama was in office, the Justice Department brought forth 25 pattern and practice investigations, looking at local law enforcement offices around the country to determine if they actually had discriminatory practices that were systemic, not one-offs, but really systemic. We need a robust civil rights division that is helping local law enforcement with the training that they need to improve. We need early intervention before it gets to be a pattern and practice. And so I say this to say, in deciding where you want to vote, you should say, are the people who are in office actually worrying about the civil rights of all Americans and not just some Americans? And so I would say that at this point in our nation's history, protecting everybody's civil rights is front and center. I'm heartened to see the Supreme Court stepping up to do its job, but we, the people, have to do our job too. And if there are issues that you care about, whether it's climate change or reducing gun violence or reforming the criminal justice system, do your homework and see whether or not the elected officials who represent you or that are running for office are consistent with your priorities and your values. And it may not be 100%, but is it better than the other person?
So you have to understand, I will always start from the bedrock principle that people are good, that we are ones that want to have a beloved community, that want to have decency and kindness be the governing virtues. And if you believe in the fundamental goodness of people, then when we expand our circles of empathy and our moral imagination, there is tremendous possibility for a racial reconciliation, for redemption, and for justice. But the problem is often people think that arc that you talk about is just going to inevitably bend towards justice. It has never been the case. All of us have a moral affirmative obligation to be arc benders. And so this is something we have to grapple with because we're dealing with hundreds of years of history where the grain is cut tragically in the other direction. We now have to take affirmative actions to be the kind of folks that create that racial reconciliation. And it's not easy. It means uncomfortable conversations, uncovering difficult truths, and making hard decisions to heal and to come together and again, to move down that road of redemption.
Mr. Mayor, as we think about the road ahead for America and for our big cities, something that you've been big on for a long time is connectivity. What are your worries about that, and what are the opportunities for a big city like yours?
It's something that I've spent a lot of time focused on, and I think it'll be interesting to see how connectivity is influenced in a post-COVID world. We now have the ability ubiquitously to communicate and to be connected virtually as opposed to in person. And I think a lot of the pre-COVID connectivity was in-person connectivity, traveling, air travel, or traveling, getting across the city and the county. And that's something that may change. It's also going to affect, to what extent we need office space. And so what's incredible about these disruptive events is that they not only disrupt our economy, but they disrupt markets. We saw, obviously with Uber and Lyft, how they disrupted an entire industry of taxi cabs. So, when you see something like this, and people are forced to use different kinds of technologies, even school has been internet based. It's interesting to see how things that we were going to spend billions of dollars on in terms of creating mass transit may be influenced by the ability to ubiquitously communicate through the internet.
Yep, 2020 was a crazy, unprecedented year in the world of politics, and Axios was there to capture it along the way. In this next segment, we're going to unpack how leaders from a number of highly influential industries, like finance and travel, had to adjust to the pandemic's restrictions while still supporting their workforces.
The existing economic inequality can be definitely exacerbated by a differential in either like adeptness with technology or investment or access to technology. And I think we're seeing an example of that play out in a pretty dystopian, almost nightmarish way right now with the massive increase in differences in educational outcomes for students over the course of this year. People who have access to technology, computers, accessible internet, and all of that, and people who don't. So already probably that's caused by some economic inequality, and now we're going to push the results even further apart. So it is worrying, and if I have a hope for the result or the outcomes that we are able to achieve out of this global crisis, it's that we can reevaluate some of the decisions that we've made along the way. Like one of them is employer-mandated healthcare. It maybe is a terrible idea if 30 million people lose their jobs right when a health crisis hits, or that maybe we do need a social safety net in this country that allows people to kind of overcome that. Because at times like this, ideally, people can question, what do they really want? What kind of life do they want? Certainly, people are forced to kind of reevaluate a lot of assumptions that they had anyway. And maybe this is wishful thinking, but I do hope that we kind of collectively see that we're all in this together. I mean, you got Republicans who thought we should just send checks to people every month, which, by the way, I think is great. Not what any of them would have said 3 months prior. So if we have that opportunity to change, we should take it.
Given that you did have to close it for months, from your perspective, does that mean that the stock exchange has actually been providing fewer services to its companies over the last few months?
Yeah, this is an experiment I never would have chosen to run, but it provided really interesting data, Dan. So it was hard for us to quantify whether or not our outperformance was driven by the market model, where we have a market maker assigned to each individual listed company at the New York Stock Exchange, or the trading floor and that element of human judgment. So we knew that stocks trade better. and you can measure that, but we couldn't measure how much comes from the fact that there's an assigned market maker and how much comes from the trading floor. Because we closed the trading floor, but those market makers still had the same level of obligations that they have when the floors are open, and they just were meeting them algorithmically and electronically, we could actually measure that difference. And it was clear that there is a portion of that outperformance that comes from the market maker model, and a portion that comes from the human judgment and that human interaction that occurs on the trading floor. So it is true that it cost investors millions of dollars a day when the floors were closed, which is another reason why we wanted to get back and toward offering that full level of service for our clients.
Karen, we did a little pregame conversation, and you were telling me that as Clear envisions it, my experience could change even before I leave my house. Tell me about the minute-to-minute idea that you have for my flying future.
It's not just an idea, it's coming. So the answer is, I also think what consumers want and what we saw after 9/11 as anxiety rises, you're talking to the ultimate control freak, right? You want predictability and control over your experience. And so we are launching a home to gate app for travel, which connects traffic information, plus how long your security experience will take, plus all you have to do is enter your flight number, and airline will know what gate you're going to. And we've mapped out how long it will take to get to that gate. So you add traffic plus Clear plus where your gate is for a time when you should leave your house to get to your gate with 35 minutes to spare. If you want to adjust that time frame, we can do that, as well. But crucial from a predictability from the very beginning to the very end.
We go into the fall being smarter. I think we've learned a lot about how to use technology better, how to engage students in a more effective way. I mean, teachers have learned so much. In many ways, let's be honest, the kids that lacked a broadband connection in May are probably going to lack it in September as well. If someone was in a home that didn't have enough digital devices to go around, they may still be facing that same problem as they start school in a couple of weeks. So for a country for whom I think universal public education has been a defining value and attribute of our society, we have a huge problem. Let's do the best we can. Let's do everything we can in the months ahead, but let's also think ahead, and let's say never again.
How do we make sure that economy doesn't leave working women behind?
It is a problem from the obvious perspective, which is women are, as you mentioned, a greater share of essential workers and are losing their jobs at a greater rate. And it's a problem at the most subtle level, which is that women are finding it, all of the micro inequities of the workplace. Oh, it's hard to get a word in edgewise in a meeting. How do I get my point of view heard? Are being really amplified in a Zoom era when I can't even catch my boss's eye in order to let him know that I want to speak and have him help me make my point. And so, women, we talk a lot about the gender pay gap, 82 cents to a man's dollar. The gender wealth gap going into the pandemic was 32 cents to a man's dollar and moving backwards. And this is now accelerating. And so, we sit here in an age in which women are saying lean in didn't particularly work. We're moving backwards. This environment is tougher. And what we're seeing is a recognition among women that, you know what, I got to take the old bull by the horns to some extent. The institutions and companies that I thought would be there for me aren't. And so what we're seeing in Ellevest is a real trend of I've got to build my own emergency fund. I've got to build my own safety net to the extent that I can.
And finally, we're capping off this program today with coverage that captures just how much this pandemic has affected all facets of healthcare access, from hospitals being able to provide care to equity in healthcare distribution.
Secretary Carson, with your doctor hat on, you've been a member of the president's COVID-19 task force. You've been literally at the table. Most recently, there have been questions about whether the president is rushing the process of treatments or vaccines. Like, how do you think that should be balanced? Speed versus trust?
Well, I think it's extremely important to put things in perspective. You know, we're in the middle of a pandemic. That is not necessarily the time to take everything slowly. That's the time to maximize your resources, not to skip steps, but to move expeditiously. And if you have something that, you know, is safe or relatively safe, and that you have anecdotal evidence that is very effective, it would behoove you to move forward with testing, not with putting it out, not with making it available to people, but with testing. And rather than just leave that process languishing, I think what the president is saying is, look, folks, this is not normal times. We need to move forward. We can't just sit around and lollygag in a time like that. I think that's what he's saying. And part of the announcement yesterday with the use of convalescent plasma indicated that maybe this was not going to be business as usual. Maybe we would look to expedite, not skip steps, but expedite steps to make sure we rapidly get these things out, because you have to recognize that we want to open the economy back up. We want people to stop being afraid of everything. And that will happen when we have some effective therapies, when we have an effective vaccine. So we certainly don't want to impede or slow down that process. We want to speed that process up. That would only make sense.
People who read my newsletters, Axios AM and PM, know that I love life lessons. And Congresswoman, as you were teaching future nurse practitioners through Georgetown, what was a life lesson, or what was a big thought that you tried to leave with nurses? What was the important, biggest big idea that you would leave with future nurses?
Yes, so for so long, nurses would say some version of, oh, I'm not political. I just take care of my patients, or that's a decision for someone else. We do not have the luxury of opting out of engaging in our political system right now. Literally everything that we do as nurses is informed by our policy process, whether it's the FDA approving a medication that we're able to give to our patients, or the rate that we're reimbursed for certain procedures. I mean, everything that we're doing is influenced by a policy process. And if we're not informing it, then we're not only letting down our colleagues, we're letting down our patients and our communities. And so I encourage them to just get involved. And during the time of a global pandemic, any policymaker that doesn't take a call from a nurse, shame on them. Shame on them. And so I've been encouraging all the nurses that I talk to during this time to continue to reach out, continue to share their stories for everybody that they can, whether it's a local mayor or county level official, their health department, all the way up to the senators and the president of the United States. We know that nurses are on the front lines of this crisis and need to be able to inform our policymakers about the current status of our healthcare system, the conditions of their patients, and the circumstances under which they're working during this extremely challenging time.
You tweeted that attacks on Dr. Anthony Fauci are actually dangerous. What did you mean by that?
Well, a couple things. First of all, I like many people, want our best players on the front line working on these issues. And Dr. Fauci is, I think, an integral player in helping us get a vaccine, not just because of his scientific work, but because of his relationships and his political capital, his ability to pull people together to get things done. You do not want to take him off the front lines. But I also mean something different, which is this sort of suppressing of this inconvenient scientific voice. It's happened with climate scientists. It's happened with the entire EPA. It's happened in other parts of our system. And look, I'm trying to keep these away from being strictly political comments, but I think if the president feels like pointy-headed scientists are getting in the way of what he believes to be the right agenda, economically, politically, what have you. And I'm not even making a judgment as to whether or not everything Dr. Fauci says is correct. I don't think he holds himself out as that. He holds himself out as someone who gives the best scientific advice he can. And whether it's listened to or not, it needs to be considered. And belittling him basically just keeps us on a track to saying that expertise doesn't matter. It puts us on a track to continue to silence people and to surround our decision makers only with people who will nod their heads in agreement, or at best maybe try to work around something they don't agree with. And it's really not a great way for us to be focusing on this crisis. And I'm distressed that there aren't enough people speaking up for Dr. Fauci.
This has been a great year of virtual events here at Axios, and a big shout out to my colleagues who have moderated and to all the others who have worked behind the scenes to make these happen. As we wrap up our year of virtual events, we want to close with a pair of clips from the Axios podcast teams, both over at Axios Today and Axios Recap.
And a big thank you to both of the podcast teams who've had a whirlwind year of coverage. Our first clip is from Bethany Allen Ibrahimian. She covers China, and this is her on Axios Today discussing the final weeks of President Trump's foreign policy strategy with China.
What are some of the policies we're thinking we're going to see here in these final weeks of the administration?
In these last 2 months, what Trump administration officials are really trying to do is lock in some of these harsher, tougher measures that the Trump administration has really become known for in their relationship with China. The administration officials who are in charge of crafting Trump's China policy are going to place a big emphasis on going after Chinese government officials and entities and companies that are deemed complicit in China's human rights violations and in threatening U.S. national security. We're also going to see some public statements from John Ratcliffe, who's the director for national intelligence, revealing some of the things that Chinese government officials and perhaps intelligence officials have been doing in the U.S. to meddle in our politics.
That was a great clip. And in looking back at other podcast clips, here's one of me on Axios Recap interviewing Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla.
How soon after, if you were to get an EUA approval, would you actually be able to begin distributing the vaccine?
I believe immediately, because we have already a few millions already produced, and we hope that we will be able to make sure that all these batches are cleared by the FDA, and we continue producing as we speak. So we will have immediately some millions doses to be able to release after safety, after quality controls. And by the end of the year, we hope to be able to release up to 50 altogether, globally.
The FDA obviously had this 50% threshold for efficacy, kind of its baseline. Obviously, everyone would like 100% efficacy, because why wouldn't you in a vaccine? What was Pfizer's target, or at least where did you think this was going to come in?
We were hoping for the best. I have to admit that I never hoped that it will be, because it's not 90, I said it's more than 90. So I never hope that will be more than 90%. And that's a very, very strong, overwhelming indication of efficacy.
In closing our program, Nyla, give me one big thing that excites you about going into 2021.
I am excited, Dan, about the possibility of maybe actually working in our office for the first time and producing a daily podcast with all of my colleagues in person. I'm hoping that will happen. Dan, you covered a lot of things in the past year. I wonder, what's your one big thing that you want to share with us for 2021?
I guess my one big thing, covering business, is that maybe finally we will start to have the real economy and kind of the Wall Street stock market economy start to talk to one another and maybe have some sort of relationship to one another. Although my real one big thing, I think, is the same one as everybody's, right? I'm just looking forward to 2020 being over. A huge thanks to everyone who's tuned into these events this year, listened to our podcasts, and obviously to our partners. None of this would be possible without all of you. We hope you continue to tune into our events in 2021, as our team has lots of exciting new items to roll out. Until then, we'll see you at Axios.com.